Hello, and welcome back to Living a Culture of Life podcast by Human Life International. I'm your host, Colleen, and today I am very excited to welcome Josh Wood, Executive Director of Them Before Us, to the podcast. On today's episode, Josh and I discuss the Greater Than campaign, which is seeking to overturn Obergefell versus Hodges, the 2015 Supreme Court decision which effectively legalized same-sex quote-unquote marriage. On today's episode, Josh explains how the redefinition of marriage led to the redefinition of parenthood, and how countless children have been deprived of one or both biological parents through practices like IVF and surrogacy. He also addresses head-on the claim that children who grow up in same-sex households turn out just as well as children growing up in the homes of their married biological parents. We talk about biological hypocrisy and how Christians can use a child's rights approach to help a secular world understand the issues with things like IVF, surrogacy, and same-sex marriage. It's a great episode. I hope that you enjoy it. As always, if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or any of our audio platforms, please hit that subscribe button and leave us a 5-star review. And if you're listening on YouTube, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that bell notification. Without further ado, please welcome Josh Wood to Living a Culture of Life. Welcome to the podcast, Josh. It's great to have you here.
Yeah, thanks for having us on.
I'm very excited for today's episode because we're going to be discussing your organization's effort to overturn Obergefell, which when I heard about that, I was like, this is so cool, and I can't wait to hear more about it. So before we begin, though, could you tell our audience a little bit about who you are and what your organization does?
My name's Josh Wood. I live here in Charlotte, North Carolina. I have been working for Them Before Us, which is a child's rights organization, for going on 3 years now. Before that, I was in ministry in the church world here in Charlotte. Before that, I was a missionary working with uh, immigrants and refugees here in Charlotte on the east side of our town, helping kids flourish, connect through sports. That was kind of my background, but always had really an interest in seeing kids thrive. And so this work with Them Before Us is always aligned with that. We care deeply about protecting a child's connection to their mother and father. We believe that they have a right to be raised by their mother and father. And we believe that because we know all the data says when a child has those two people in their life, when they're married, they thrive, they flourish. It's the best thing for them in any way you measure, from education to income to health, mental health. All of it is better when kids are connected to those two people. So that in a nutshell is what we do is we fight to protect the child and their right to their mother and father.
Yeah. What inspired you to take that approach? Because I feel like a lot of organizations can pick one specific issue and they focus more on that. So approaching lots of different issues, all from the child's rights perspective, seems more unique. So what inspired that?
I think the reason it stands out in culture today as unique is the fact that everything we talk about in culture is centered on adults. I mean, if I had one like phrase everyone should learn is learn to say you're not the victim. All of our policies, all of our discussions, every time we go off track, it's typically because some adult has hijacked the conversation to make it all about them. I mean, we talk a lot about IVF. We'll talk today about gay marriage. So much of that, we've gone wrong because every part of the conversation begins with, well, here's what I'm going through. I was struggling with infertility. I've had miscarriages. I wanted a child really badly. And so, how dare you talk poorly about IVF because it made possible my family? It's like, well, we're not saying infertility is not hard. We're not saying that's an incredible burden to bear. We're not saying that that's not heartbreaking. Some of our staff have all gone through that. Some of us have been in IVF clinics with our own families to talk through that process and learned about what it entails. What we are saying is no child should have to sacrifice so an adult gets what they want. That's unjust. We cannot have that as a society. We shouldn't tolerate it. And so I think our child's rights or child centered view stands out because the world has become completely adult centered.
One thing that I really admire about your organization is that you approach this from a non-religious perspective, but in a way that can empower religious people to understand the data and the science behind these issues also. Because sometimes when you're conversing, our audience is mostly religious, but if you're conversing with someone who
has a secular framework and isn't just going to accept gay marriage is wrong because the church says so, that they need to understand like it's you provide the tools for Christians to be able to defend their beliefs from a like human reason, child-centered framework. So I just wanted to kind of point that out for our audience of one thing that you can really get out of this is understanding the data and the reasons that things like gay marriage are wrong so that you can help the secular world understand that. So,
Yeah. I have a
yeah.
deep faith. I am motivated at a fundamental level by my belief that every person is made in the image of God. And because of that, we must treat everybody equally, regardless of their stage or the location, whether they are in a lab or in a womb or outside the womb. And
Mhm.
but I also think that I have incredible confidence in the gospel to believe that what God says is a good design, what He intended. When we operate according to that, we're going to see that play out positively in culture. And so, a lot of times, we don't have to go back to God's design because the data will prove the best path. And
Yeah.
what we find in the data over and over again is a reflection of the correct order, which is children belonging to their mother and father and having a right to be raised by them. And what I mean by belong is that when a child comes out of the womb, there's a fundamental question in culture today: where do they belong? Do they have a preset place? I could do a blood test on a child and find out who their mother and father are.
Yeah.
That's a biological fact. It's not any different than the transgender discussion when we tried to culture tried to say, "Well, actually, that was just your sex assigned at birth." We can no more assign sex at birth than we can assign parents at birth. Children
Uh-huh.
are born with them. They are they are connected to two people who created them. It's only ever taken two people. It has always throughout history been a man and a woman, and we have traditionally always called those two people mother and father. What's happening today is that culture wants to say, actually, how you've determined father, even in my own situation, when I was handed a child in labor and delivery after my wife had given birth, the government didn't say, I now assign you mother and father. They that I would say BS. I am the father, and nothing you declare makes that true. You can
Yep.
recognize a fact, but you cannot pronounce it and make it true. It's a reality that you must recognize and contend with. Well, that's not true in culture today anymore. The government believes, bureaucrats believe that they can actually step in and say, no, 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 no. You're the father because I said so. And that's the fundamental issue that we're fighting.
Yeah. No, that's a really good framework to also have of this is how the government views it. I think sometimes when you grow up with a certain framework about obviously I'm the mother and father and this is my biological child, like obviously I'm the mother. You forget how other people can view that or how the government can look at it. I do wanna get into the data and the reasons that same-sex, quote, unquote, "marriage" is, victimizes children. But before we get into that topic in particular, what inspired them before us to launch the Greater Than campaign to overturn Obergefell?
It's a great question. Most people assume it's because we have something out for the LGBTQ community. We just don't like them existing or something like that. It couldn't be farther from the truth. What we couldn't stand was to see the argument they constructed, which was this is a private issue. What we do in our bedroom has nothing to do with you straight people. So stay out. Well, what we know now, what we said then and what we know now is that argument was never true. They they every one of those arguments has proved to be false. Same-sex couples want to create children. We we falsely assumed, or culture falsely bought the lie that same-sex couples would not want to create children, that they actually would only want to adopt. Now, there's a study, it was from the Williams Center at UCLA, that cited only 36% of LGBTQ couples said adoption was their ideal path to forming a family. Everyone else, I think, 61% said they preferred to pursue creation of a child. Well, what does every single same sex couple that creates a child require that child to do? It requires the child to be deprived of one or more of their biological parents. How does that happen? Two men will go to an egg bank and they will purchase an egg. That will happen. That could be $30,000. Now they'll create a child through IVF. Sometimes they'll use their own sperm. Sometimes they use a donor sperm. That will determine whether the child is, deprived of their mother and their father or just their mother. They'll then rent a womb. So they will pay a surrogate to carry their child. That will often be 75 to 100 and could be $150,000. Now again, when people say I donated my egg or I'm doing this altruistic thing as a surrogate, it's never true. I mean, they are always getting paid to do these things, and they're getting paid well to do these things. Then once the child is born, again, they walk out and the government will declare, and this is where this intersects with Obergefell. Why did we do it? Because in the decision here with the Supreme Court said, what you have always granted to straight couples through marriage, you cannot deny those things now to same-sex couples. So, for hundreds of years in our country, we would declare the father to be, or the husband to be the father. In the labor and delivery room, we didn't do a blood test to determine whether the father was actually biologically related. We assumed, it's parental assumption, we assumed if you're married and you guys are having sex, the child is probably yours. And actually, we believe that so strongly that actually you're going to have automatic parentage of this child. We believe that the child is biologically yours. Again, that was rooted not in it was rooted in biology. It was the recognition that sex creates babies. It wasn't just something we made up. Well then, okay, fast forward. What do we have to do now? Now, if you did that for a man, you have to do that for a woman. So when a woman gives birth, her wife, who could not possibly, it is scientifically impossible for her to be the mother. We have to grant this fiction to say, you now get to be mom because the Supreme Court said so. So we went after this decision, and we're trying to help people understand the connection, because every single one of these situations now is requiring father loss. It's requiring mother loss. And we think no child should be intentionally deprived of their mother or father. And if this decision is what is locking this in constitutionally in our country, and it's preventing us from moving back towards the family as it should be understood, well, then it has to go.
Yeah. As you were talking about that, one thing kind of just struck me as so interesting how, on the one hand, you have this framework that the government is assigning mother and father and not recognizing biology. But on the flip side, same sex couples often want the biological connection to their child, which is why they
Bingo.
don't want to go the route of adoption. So there's this like
It's a
conflicting.
biological hypocrisy. How could
Yeah.
they how could they say the child doesn't need a mother and father? Biological connection is irrelevant. I mean, that's the argument, right? That when I held my child and they looked like me, my son looked like me, that's just some kind of sentimentality. It's something just held over from evolution, that I would have some attachment to this kid and not some other kid. That the doctor could have brought in any kid and I would have felt the same way. Like absolutely not. We Biological connection matters to us. That's how we've been as a species forever. But what they want us to believe is that isn't really significant. But then as soon as they move past that, they want that connection too. They just don't believe in it enough to give the child both parents. They think the child should sacrifice half, even if the father then gets all the biological connection. It's a hypocrisy.
It seems like also from what you were saying before that Obergefell was based on the idea of like an adult's rights to rights to a civil marriage instead of the child's rights to a mom and dad. So being able to talk about how the traditional family structure, I hate that we have to use these phrases, but marriage
Mhm.
um is always going to be a mother and a father, and that is the natural setup for a family. And so being able to reframe from like a human reason perspective, why does marriage exist? It exists for the procreation of children.
Yeah, well, we know that uh, mom is always going to be connected to baby. That's how it's always been throughout society. But society, again, if you look across history, had to find a way to keep dad connected to baby as well. To it, I mean, even just you want to talk about so that the child and the mother get to live, right? That so that they have provision, so they have protection. So if you step back now and the mechanism for doing that was where the father is bonded to the mother. If we connect mom or father to mother and mother to baby, now you're going to get all three together at once. And so this is not something that society decided, we need a ceremony where everyone gets to get celebrated and gets to put together a wedding registry. No, we discovered marriage as a almost like a mechanism for the flourishing of children, for the protection of children, for the protection of women. And it it was across all time. It was across all cultures. There's almost no culture in history that hasn't had this type of bond. And so to think with the arrogance or hubris that suddenly we can redefine it, that we can replace children or cut and paste them into any arrangement or communally raise a child, it's ludicrous.
Yeah. Now, the devil's advocate argument to this is why get rid of Obergefell? Why not just not allow same-sex couples to adopt? So, for instance, why shouldn't a same-sex couple who has no interest in welcoming children, um, be able to just civilly get married and have their union that way? How would you respond to that?
Well, first off, I think, pre-Obergefell, California still had what was called intent-based parenthood. That's where the definition of mother and the definition of father is no longer who has created the child. It is now who the state says is the parent. It is who the state assigned. It's parents assigned at birth. So that regime existed pre-Obergefell. It just existed it only in certain places where, again, the citizens of that state had decided that's how they want to do family. The the positive side of that was in Alabama and Georgia, Tennessee, Florida, we said no. We said natural family. It is mothers and fathers. That's the definition. So if we ever want to go back to that, if a state wants to go back to that, if they want to say, actually, it's economically even in our best interest to ensure children stay with their moms and dads. So hey, here's a tax credit. If you are married and raise your own children, we're going to give you a bonus. We're going to pay you a couple $1,000 because we know your kid won't end up in foster care. Your kid won't end up in jail. And so it's actually saving us money. Well, if we ever want to go back there, we have to have Obergefell fall. There's right now to do that, to only give married mothers and fathers who are shown to be the safest place for kids, shown to be the best place for them to be raised, if they want to flourish, to privilege them above another would be to discriminate because same sex couples don't have the biological ability to create a child. So if you premise a law on the ability to create a child, which we would say that's not bigotry, that's just biology, that's not science, this has nothing to do. You're welcome to create a child. You just have to do it with your married partner, and it has to be someone of the opposite sex. That's how making babies happens. But the pre-Obergefell regime had at least two different options. Again, I would still say California was unjust, but at least there was some places still who could be an example to say our families are doing better, our kids are doing better. Well, now, unless that goes, we can't return or push back or begin defending kids. So I think that's first what needs to happen.
Yeah. No, that's really interesting. I never really thought about the legal ramifications of having Obergefell in place other than simply allowing, same-sex couples to civilly marry. I just haven't thought about how that affects the ability for states to not be able to offer specific tax credits and uphold traditional family. So that's, like, a really helpful framework to have.
Or even, for example, to regulate surrogacy. I mean, if we wanted to say, hey, straight or gay couples, we don't want anyone using a third party, sperm or egg. We don't want anyone using a surrogate. Well, if that is the only pathway to parenthood, scare quotes parenthood, for a same sex couple, well, then you have now put an obstacle to parenthood. You're not providing them equal access to parenthood. That could potentially be unconstitutional. So now you're talking about if we don't want sperm or egg to be able to be bought and sold, if we don't want kids to be able to be bought and sold through surrogacy, if we don't want anonymous donors to be, I mean, there's cases right now of men that will donate to several sperm banks in a very small area. And you may create 200 children in a very small geographic area where you may have 200 half siblings all growing up at the same time in a very small area that don't know that they're related. That's a public health crisis. Well, to put an end to that could potentially be an infringement on now this equal access to the constellation of benefits of marriage. Well, again, you just start going down the thing. You now have handicapped the state's ability to say, this is how we do family here. it is in our supreme interest to protect kids, to make sure they flourish. We believe it's through a mom and a dad raising their kids. Well, now again, the law of the land comes down and says, actually, you don't get to do that.
Mhm. One thing we've talked about on this show before too is how the family is the cell of society. And so when families are strong, your society is strong. So it does make sense that the government would have a vested interest in making sure that families are flourishing and that children are flourishing
Of
for the
course.
sake of the nation. So obviously this is
Unfortunately, though, the Supreme Court said the only reason you guys are fighting this is because there's animus. I mean, that was their articulation was back then. They said the only reason you would deny these two adults the ability to have a party and celebrate and have dignity would be because you don't like gay people. Well, again, we're trying to flip that on its head and go, this is not about you. You're not the victim, adults. Just because you can't get married does not make you the victim. The victim are the thousands of children that will be created intentionally motherless and fatherless because of this regime. They're the victim. Get the spotlight off the adults.
Could you go over some of the how our audience can respond to the argument that children that grow up in same-sex households turn out just as well as children who grow up with a mother and a father?
Well, I think there's a couple routes you can go, but start with everybody acknowledges that a loss of a parent is psychologically traumatic on a child. I mean, it's so traumatic that I can name about 1,000 movies where the kid goes in search of one of their parents. Like, I mean, my kids just watched Land Before Time the other day. It's like there's so many movies that talk about I need to find my long lost mother. I need to find my father. I was adopted, but I want to know who my birth parents are. It's like so central to the human existence that to sever that on purpose, we would all agree, yeah, that sounds awful. Until you say, but what if gay couples do it? What if a same sex couple does it? Or again, this doesn't have to be an LGBTQ thing. You can also say, what if a straight couple uses a sperm donor because they can't get pregnant? Well, then we suddenly go, oh, I think they're going to be just as good. I think it's going to be fine. There's going to be absolutely no ramifications. But again, that's absurd. That's absurd. The data shows that, but also just using our brains, it is absurd to believe that a child can be conceived in loss and be just fine. To start day one losing one or two of those people that they're connected to biologically and that they're going to be just fine. So let's start there. But point number two, these families, two men, two women, always require a donor. Again, they purchase the egg or sperm, but it always requires a donor. So there's a large study, My Daddy's Name is Donor, which set children conceived through sperm or egg donation. It was all sperm donation in this case. Uh, Set aside adopted children and set aside children who were born to their mother and father. And it compared outcomes. And some of the fascinating outcomes were adopted children still had struggles. Like we recognize that in the adopted community. Again, you got to remember when we study adoptees, everybody is quick to recognize, man, they go through some trauma. It's difficult. Even if they're at birth, they don't remember anything about their circumstance. They're communicated to through the process. You're adopted. They still go through challenges, hearing, man, why didn't my mother want me? Why didn't my father want me? Well, we acknowledge in the adoption lane, yeah, they have trauma. That's hard. Yeah, they probably suffer some emotional distress. Yeah, they probably have some negative outcomes. But you've got the exact same situation happening in parallel with many straight and gay couples who use donors. And we are very quick to go, I think they're going to be just fine. I think everything's fine. They just need a loving family. It's like, wait. The loss is the same. Now, it's true. Sometimes sperm donor families, donor conceived children are not told of their origins. Sometimes it comes out 40 or 50 years later. But again, if, and they'll be middle aged finding out, taking a swab of their mouth for a 23andMe test and finding out I've got 30 half siblings and they're traumatized by it. But again, that just shows you if it didn't really matter and all that matters is that they had a loving family, then why would they care about the biology? You don't get to determine what matters to a child. And the study showed that the adopted couples and the couples that were donor conceived had unique struggles that the couples or the children born into their married mother and father households did not have. And we know that to be true. Now, again, even in the wake of the Obergefell decision, and if you go to thembeforeus.substack.com, we have a number of studies that address this, or articles that address this specific issue, including one that's entitled "The Study That Should Have Stopped Gay Marriage." And it took a long view and showed statistically children raised in same-sex households do not fare as well. And it does dive into all of the studies that were paraded out during this case to show they do just as fine, to show that I mean, seriously, I think there were 79 studies, and I think 3 passed the smell test. I mean, I think there's something like 75 or 76 of them are, like, small sample sizes, or they just called the parents and said, "Can you tell me how well your child's doing? Are they doing pretty good?" Like, it's totally just absolutely shams. Um, and so it calls into question, it's like, you know what? We recognize in every area of life that losing a parent is a very big deal and it harms a child. We make this one exception. I mean, one last thing. Barack Obama made a big part of his legacy talking about fatherlessness. We need mentors and models, role models for kids and fathers in homes. But where is that call out when you've got two women raising a child? It's like fathers are just undeniably a good thing and everybody needs them, except when we get to two women using a sperm donor. Then suddenly we go, actually, I think fathers are replaceable. In this particular situation, they'll be fine.
Yeah. Are there any specific ways because that was addressing losing a parent because you're growing up in a same-sex household, you're, like, necessarily gonna lose one biological parent. Is there anything specific to the same-sexness of the household that they miss out on if they don't actually if they're growing up in a household with 2 women and they don't have a father, how specifically that will affect children? Or if they're growing up with 2 men and they don't have a mother, the outcomes that that has on the children?
Yeah, well, I mean, I found it funny that through, the kind of DEI craze of the last 5 or 6 years, there was certain corporations like Boeing, for example, I think was one, and don't quote me if I'm wrong on that, but they required, I think, equal representation of male and female on the corporate board.
Mm.
And they said, How could we possibly make good decisions if we don't have a male and female perspective for our board to run this company?" Well, you mean to tell me that it's pivotal that we have a female's perspective in a corporate boardroom, but it's not pivotal that we have a male's perspective in the child's life? It's pivotal that we have a female, but it's not pivotal for the child to have a mother? I mean, again, it's only this one area of life where we try to claim that the genders don't matter and that you can just have two loving parents. It's absolutely absurd. We had a video that's coming out on Mother's Day, so whenever you're watching this, you can go to our website thembeforeus.com. You'll see the video, but it's of a guy who was raised by two women, and he says that they didn't do a bad job. They loved me and cared for me, but no matter how well they loved me and cared for me, two women can never be my dad.
Mhm.
And I mean, it's heartbreaking, but it's the story we hear over and over again. Them Before Us is really centered on stories from children and testimonies. And so, again, at our Substack, you can see all these, but he just says over and over again, uh, I just craved male presence. I craved male attention. I wanted to hang out with my baseball coach 24/7. I loved that he had a cool muscle car, and something about watching him drive recklessly, like, was awesome. Like, it's just very male things. And you're like, you know what? We were built to, we were created by two specific genders. And you mean to tell me that there's nothing inherent about that? There's nothing interesting or important about the fact that two specific different genders are required to create us, but we don't need those two to develop and thrive? Again, it goes back to the hubris point that we're really re-engineering something that's been so basic and served us for so many years.
Could you go into detail for our audience about some of the specific ways that children who are raised in homes with their mother and their father are better off than children who grow up in same-sex households? So, for instance, I'm gonna probably guess that education, they probably do better in school. What are some other specific ways that they excel?
Well, I think the most important one is safety, for one. That if you want to find the most protective uh, situation for a child to be in, it is in a household with their mother and father who are married. They have the lowest rates of sexual abuse, lowest rates of neglect, and they will have, again, even married mothers and fathers, their abortion rate is minimal compared to single women. It's like it's all things we know. So if you want to talk about how do I protect my kid, it's well, as a father, it's being married to their mother. That's the most protective thing. They're going to do, even in when you talk about upward mobility. If you have, there's one study, I think it was Richard Reeves. He documented that if a child is born into poverty with a single mother, he's going to have about a 1 in 5 chance of ever getting out. That goes to 4 out of 5 if the child has a married mother and father. Like, it is, if you followed the success sequence, for example, and you choose to graduate high school, get a job, get married, then have kids, your child, again, whether you're black, brown, born in Baltimore or Charlotte, North Carolina, your kid has a 97% chance of never being in poverty in their entire life. So so kids are obviously have them doing better in school. It's better mental health outcomes. It's higher lifetime earnings. I mean, everything is connected back to them being connected to the two people, who created them, who they have a right to. Which, I know this is all common sense, but for some reason in culture today, we've kind of slid into, I think marriage is optional. I think kids can go with whoever so long as two people love them, and it's just not true.
Yeah. It was really interesting because we had a father of adopted children on the podcast earlier this year, and he was talking about how around the time that culture started redefining family was when you saw a push in the adoption world to have like the birth parent involved as well as the adopted parent,
Yep.
and basically redefining family to say, oh, all of these people are part of the family. And it was just a really interesting connection that he made of how this whole effort to redefine family has also affected families that are adopting children. And so just kind of the ripple effects of this in our world. One thing I did want to kind of bring up is that it seems like if the argument is that children do better growing up with their biological mother and their biological father, what about situations of adoption where like a man and a woman who are married adopt a child, or situations where a child's father dies and their mother is raising them on their own? If it's important that a child has both the biological mother and the biological father, does that mean that adoption shouldn't be available, or does that mean that biological mothers who lose a husband should be, like, forced to get married again? Like, I don't want people to walk away thinking that that's what we're arguing, so how would you respond to that?
Well, I think the preservation of the ideal is totally important. We have to we have to hold up, the married mother father as what we should all be striving for. Now, you set that aside though, and there's a situation where dad walks out. Well, think about this: if dad walks out and you've got a heroic single mother doing all she can to provide for her kids, the inclusion experts would come to her and say, "You know what? You love him and he's going to be just fine. He's actually going to be just as good as anybody else because all he needs is you're strong. You're a strong woman. You can do this all on your own." It's like, "Wait a second. No." like I want you to recognize what I've lost. I want you to tell me that the dad should have stayed in the picture. I don't want you to tell me my kid will be just fine. I hope they are. And again, my kid isn't a statistic, but also irresponsible behavior shouldn't be washed away in effort to include everyone. There's an ideal that's been fractured, and I deserve empathy and compassion for that. My child deserves empathy and compassion for that, not to be told that all paths lead to prosperity. They just don't. And so with adoption, you've got a similar situation. I mean, I think some of the good aspects of this conversation is that we've begun to recognize that adoption isn't the ideal. Like, we all should hope that a child doesn't have to be adopted. We should hope that every child gets to be raised by their mother and father. No, I've never met an adoptive parent who told me that they're super happy their child got put up for adoption. They may be grateful that God has blessed them with the opportunity to help raise this child, but to pretend like that didn't the opportunity to raise the child didn't come at great cost to the child, to have to lose that relationship. It might have been the right choice. It might have been the choice that, the I was talking to a parent yesterday who adopted a child whose mother was addicted to drugs. Obviously not safe for the kid. No one's advocating that your biology isn't supreme here. It's always what's best for the kid. But what we are able to recognize in that situation is that it is a tragedy that that child was separated from their mother. It's a tragedy that that mother was addicted to drugs and couldn't put that behind her to raise her kid. And we can all mourn with the child as they ask one day, why did my mother abandon me? Why did my mother give me up? And we can say, that is awful, and I'm sorry that that happened to you. The opposite situation is called third party reproduction. It's where the loss isn't a tragedy, it's an intention. It's two adults who buy the kid, who buy the sperm, buy the egg, buy the surrogate to create the wound. They are on that day when the child says, "Why did my mother give me up?" They say, "Do you know how much I paid for you? How ungrateful you are." That's a real quote we've gotten from a kid. How ungrateful you are. Do you know how expensive you were? That you know how much money it costs us to buy that egg from that, UCLA field hockey player? It's like that is totally different psychologically for the child to know that the people responsible for my loss are the people I'm living with. I mean, that is a totally different impact on the kid.
Yeah. No, it's a really helpful perspective to be able to understand that. If we could go back to the Greater Than campaign then, what does this effort look like going forward? Is there a specific state law that this is based on that is being appealed to the Supreme Court? What does the campaign look like in its details?
Well, I think we've got a huge effort just to raise awareness of how specifically this ruling and how gay marriage becoming constitutional across this country has desperately impacted kids. I mean, I think that's first and foremost. We need to raise awareness that same-sex families required child loss, period. And this ruling required same-sex families. That is point number 1. Then I think step 2, point number 2 is that we need to now at the state level begin to challenge that is the notion that a state doesn't have a legitimate interest in in the health and flourishing of their children and incentivizing the environments where they're going to be safest, where they're going to thrive, where they're going to be upwardly mobile. And so we need to encourage states to start stepping up to saying, we don't sell gametes here. We don't buy egg, we don't buy sperm, we don't buy surrogates. That's not good for our kids. Loss is not good for our kids. So actually, that's now illegal here. And let's fight it out. I want to see the Supreme Court personally have to choose between an adult's desire to have the dignity of a marriage celebration, a piece of paper, and child loss. That's the question I want them to answer, and I think there's a million ways that states can begin to say to reassert their interest in the health and well-being of children.
What is so in the campaign, are you targeting raising awareness about this issue in general, or are there specific legal battles that you're getting involved in?
Well, I think we're hoping that the education and awareness, and getting it to all the right people, helping them to understand and reassert their interests, and to protect and defend kids. I mean, we know that there's lots and lots of smart people, and they'll begin to see, man, how in my current context, and whether that's a pastor, whether that's a business owner, that they'll begin to think, this is how I can begin to protect the child's right in my current context. And maybe that's a legislator, maybe it's a, I don't know. That's our hope is we want to see all of these different arenas, people begin to reassert a child's right, and protect children. And again, we've got some ideas that we hope people can begin to push forward. Some of those I mentioned, banning donor anonymity. I want to see us stop. I mean, it seems crazy that we're still um, buying surrogates to hand children to unrelated men. I mean, there was a case in Pennsylvania where a guy was a sexual predator. I mean, he was a school teacher and got charged because he was preying on a kid. And when he got out, or when he went to adopt, he knew he couldn't adopt in Pennsylvania, right? And so then he goes, "Well, I can create a child through surrogacy, even though I'm on the sexual offender registry." And so it's things like that. Like, how are we still allowing that in this country? And so I'd love, for example, let's overturn that. Let's pass a law that says sexual predators can't acquire children through surrogacy. I mean, if that's not a 90-10 issue in this country, we may lose all hope.
What do you think the hope of success is with this effort? Like, what timeline are you looking at? Is this something that you're have reasonable hope that it could happen soon, or is this more of a recognition that this needs to happen eventually, so we're gonna lay the groundwork right now with raising awareness?
You know, sometimes I think things can happen very quickly. I would say the last couple weeks have shocked a lot of us that some of these videos, if you've seen any of them go viral on the internet about two men acquiring a child, that child crying out for their mom, and these two men laughing at them saying, "You don't have a mom." I mean, that turned a lot of people's opinions, and that's all it takes is if enough normal people wake up and say, "We're not gonna have males acquiring kids anymore," this all will fall. And so we're not necessarily looking at a timeline. I'll keep raising money and pushing forward on this no matter how long it takes. But I would say that the more this community, people who've done this, people who've victimized children in this way, continue to post videos and photos of them with their kids, or there was another one of a guy mocking a birth in a bed while his surrogate stood in the hospital room watching him. This man with braids and long finger. I mean, it's just crazy. I'm like, you guys, you are making plain what we have all been arguing. And words are great, pictures are worth 1,000 words. If people can see you intend to acquire a child and deprive them of a mother, and you don't feel bad about it because you feel entitled to kids, I'm like, that makes a really strong argument for us. And when public opinion starts to shift on this issue, I think things
Mhm.
could happen quickly.
Yeah. It does seem too like the conversations surrounding, IVF and surrogacy, not necessarily within the realm of same-sex couples, but just in general, that there's been more conversation about it on the internet. There's one, influencer who I see her videos come up a lot, and she was conceived, it's Laura High. She was, like, the donor conceived person of TikTok is how she's branded herself, and she's not opposed to donor conception and, IVF and all of that specifically, but she does advocate for, like, what she terms ethical, like, boundaries on it. Like, you have to have regulations. And it's really interesting just watching her videos and getting her perspective of just realizing how widespread this issue's been over the past, like, 30, 40, however many years. And the impact that it has on these now grown adults who were conceived this way and realizing that they have these multiple siblings and what those stories are. And it's just kind of interesting because even though she's not necessarily coming from the "we need to ban this practice" perspective, it does help raise awareness about the impact this has on individuals and how it affects their family dynamics. So, I think I've just seen a lot more of this conversation in the past, like, 2 or 3 years than I ever had before.
I think we're having a civilizational moment where we are debating the nature of a child
Mhm.
when they're born. Uh, what rights do they have? Where do they come from? I mean, even like we've been fighting it out over when life begins, but I think we're also answering the question now when they come out of the womb. Are they attached to anybody, and does it matter? And or are they actually just free to be placed anywhere we feel like, and with any unvetted person? And does their connection to their mom and dad matter at all? And this is it. I mean, I think this is the big question to for us to answer and to fight over. And I think normal people need to wake up to understand that that fundamental definition of what it means to be mother, father, and child is the front line right now.
Yeah. It's crazy that we have to debate biology, but that's where we are right now. It
Absolutely.
is also, I think, good to raise the conversation of what role the government has in protecting and upholding families and children as well, because even from among Christians, I think there can be this perspective of, "Oh, our nation is more secular. Why should the government impose a Christian view of marriage on people? Why not just let sex couples have their civil marriage?" So being able to raise the conversation of, "No, there's actually a civilizational reason that this exists and that the government should be supporting it," is important.
Mm.
So,
I couldn't. I mean, this it just feels like the right moment to be having this conversation.
yeah, no, for sure. For any of our listeners who would like to be involved in this, what resources do you have and where do you recommend that they go to learn more about this effort?
Well, certainly, if this is your fight too, if this is on your heart, thenbeforeus.com. We have a national coalition nearing 100 people, different organizations that are advocating for children on this Greater Than campaign. We'd love your support to give, to get involved. And then on the equipping side, if you're just an everyday mom and dad like me, and you want to, you want to read to get the words you need to advocate for kids, in the boardroom or in the coffee shop or around the dinner table, our Substack is a great resource, thembeforeus.com or thembeforeus.substack.com. We do 2 articles a week, and it's on topics just like this to teach you how to respond and how to defend kids.
Mhm. I found them very helpful, and from my perspective, it's a really helpful, like I said at the beginning, human reason reaffirming with truth and data and science what we know from a Christian worldview. So, as a philosophy major, I'm always a fan of anything that is human reason based that supports the faith, because that was something that was really impactful to me in college was learning about virtue and learning about all of these things that it allows you to meet people who don't share a religious framework, be able to meet them with something that they might be able to understand. So, I definitely recommend to
Absolutely.
our audience, it's a good way to be able to defend the view of marriage that we have with the faith by being able to, understand the stats and statistics behind it, so
It's great. I
well,
appreciate all your advocacy on the topic.
yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Josh, and could you just tell our audience what your social media is and where people can find you, online?
Yep. So certainly you can go to at them before us to
Mhm.
follow us on Instagram, Twitter, all those things. And then my handle is J_K_Wood.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show today and talking about this.
You got it. Thank you.
You're welcome. And to all of our audience, please like and subscribe, and please share this episode with someone that you think would benefit from it, and as always, keep on living the culture of life. God bless.